Now that you know a little bit more about the Photoshop interface and how to get around to the different elements, I think it's a good idea to back up a little bit and learn how to open up or start a new Photoshop file from scratch. So I'm going to exit out of the projects that I had opened before. You can also, if you have those open, go to File, New, and it's going to bring open this window for a new Photoshop document. Or if you're opening up Photoshop and you have this window, just click Create New. This window has a lot of pre-built templates that you can use, so you can see any recent documents that you've started. For example, if you are always creating a YouTube thumbnail like I do, I have a couple different projects that have those dimensions already so that I don't have to create it from scratch. Or you can go through these tabs up here and you can kind of see some common options. So under print, you have your typical 8.5 by 11 inch paper file. For web, you have different ones for like websites, mobile, film and video. Again, this is a great one to get straight to the perfect size for a thumbnail, for your YouTube video, or whatever it is, or a graphic for your video, depending on the presets. But if you want to create something completely from scratch, you go over to this panel over in the right-hand side, or you can start with one of these options that you have and then customize it. Either way works. But here we have on our right-hand side, we have the different options. So you have a name. So if you want to call it a certain thing, so we'll call this, maybe we'll call this social, if I could spell, social post. A social post, we might want to make a square. And then below the title you give it, you have your options for the size and the aspect ratio. So you have your width and height, and this is in inches currently, but you can change this. So for example, if you want to work in pixels, which is common for anything that's going to go online, you can use pixels, and say we want something to be a perfect square, we would put the width to be 1000 by 1000. And I'm just tabbing through these and using my keyboard, or you can just click and type in your numbers. Say, so now the orientation for a square doesn't matter if it's portrait or landscape, which you can see here, I can't click. But say it was inches. So say we have, and you can see that when I go back to inches, it converts those pixels to inches for us. But say we have a 5 by 7 photo, but we want to change it automatically to orientation or to a landscape orientation, you can just click this button and it will kind of swap these numbers to change the orientation. Let's go back to our pixels though. And now let's go 1000 by 1000. The next option is this artboards checkbox. Now, artboards is something that is newer to Photoshop, and if you've used Adobe Illustrator, you are familiar with what artboards are. But we'll be going into depth about this later on in this section. But basically, what this allows you to do is have multiple versions of a project that you're working on up at one time. So before, we would actually have to open up multiple different Photoshop files to have like 2 different projects we're working on. But now with artboards, you can actually have like 2 1000 by 1000 pixel projects or graphics that you're working on in one project. I know that sounds a little confusing, but for now, just leave that unchecked and we'll go into that later on. Resolution. This has to do with the quality of your graphic. So you can see here we have currently it says 300. And then on the right it says pixels per inch. In the US we're using inches, but in other parts of the world, or depending on what project you're working on, you might want to use pixels per centimeter. But really what this means is it's going to have 300 pixels per inch, which is a lot. Little individual pixels per inch of a graphic or a project. The higher the resolution obviously means the higher resolution and the higher quality, but you don't really need to go above 300. Typically, that's kind of the upper limit of what you would want for anything, even for print documents. You can go even lower. 72 is kind of a standard lower end resolution. 100 to 150 is kind of your mid range. And so you can play around with it, but typically staying around 150 is going to be perfectly fine. If you had literally 1 pixel per inch, this would mean that for every inch of your project, it would have 1 pixel, which is an individual color, basically. And if pixels are a little confusing to you, something you might want to refer to is the resolution of like your television. A lot of televisions, you see the 4K resolution or the standard 1080p resolution. So for now, we're just going to leave it at that. The only other thing to note is that if you have a higher resolution, it's going to increase the file size. So sometimes you might not need to go higher and might not want to go higher, even if you could, to kind of minimize that file from getting too big. So let's just leave it at 150 for now. Next, you have your color mode. So typically, you're going to want to work in RGB color. There's different color modes. A couple are popular, RGB and then CMYK. CMYK is popular for print. So if you know you're going to be printing a project out, you might want to work in CMYK because if you go to a printer and your project is in RGB, then the colors might end up a little bit different than what you were expecting. But for any sort of online graphic, use RGB. And of course, like grayscale, that's going to just be black and white. Along with this color mode, you have 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit. I would leave it on 8-bit. The higher the bit means the number of basically shades of color that are available to you in a project or when you're working on a graphic. 8-bit is perfectly fine for pretty much any project that you would need, unless you are more advanced and for example, if you're working on some sort of graphic for 3D animation or for an app or something, and whoever's asked you to create the graphic says, I need it in 16-bit color, just where to change that, but for now, just leave it at 8-bit. Under this, you have your background contents. So right now, this is basically what the background of your project will be. So right now it's set to white, and we'll see what that looks like. But you can change this to a specific color, or if you click this drop-down menu, you can choose a transparent color, or lack of color, really, just transparency. So if you're creating something like a logo where you don't want a background, you can have it be transparent. Now, this does more have to do with the background of your canvas that you're working on. You can always change the background color or add a layer with the color to a project to have a different color. And that would be done in your project itself. This is more just in terms of the canvas and how it looks when you're working. And I'll show you this in just a second. And then there are a couple advanced options for color profile and pixel aspect ratio. Again, these are more advanced. You would probably know when you need to change these if you know what these are. Color profiles, this will change depending on what monitor you're using. And for the pixels, again, if you're using or creating something for a specific video project, you might change this. But for you watching this course, I'm going to bet you that you just want to leave it at square pixels and the color profile at whatever it is set to right now for you. All right, you still with me? Because now we're going to click create and it's going to open up this project. And you can see that it has a white background. Really quickly, I'm just going to click file new. I'm going to change the background to black and click create. And then we're going to go to File, New, and change the background to transparent and click Create. And so you can see, if I tab between these, the different options you have for the background being a specific color. And the transparency is this checkerboard pattern. So if you ever see this sort of checkerboard, it means that it's going to be transparent. Like I said, perfect for editing or creating logos or graphics where you don't want a background. That being said, you can still create graphics in these other projects and turn off your background. And I'll just show you really quickly, even though we haven't gone over the layers panel. If you check on this little eyeball option next to the background, first we have to turn off the lock, which this background layer is typically locked in the beginning, and then we turn off that eyeball. You can see that it becomes transparent. So this is sort of just a temporary background that's locked. Same here with this black background. Unlock it, it becomes a layer instead of a background, and you can now turn that on or off. So there's always kind of multiple ways to do things in Photoshop, and you'll realize that as you go through this course. And if you take other courses or watch other tutorials by other people, you'll see that they do things differently in Photoshop. And that's completely fine. I'm showing you the ways that I do different things that makes the most sense to me, and I hope that it works for you. But like I said, there's lots of different ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. It's such an advanced application. But now you know how to open up a project at any sort of specific size or aspect ratio in Photoshop. So congrats to you. That's a big step, and we'll see you in the next lesson.